The lights flickered once in the server vault, just once, but I knew the hum wasn't right. It was 2:13 a.m. I was in socks, sweats, and a hoodie from a tech conference they forgot to pay me back for. My laptop was balanced on an old crate of spare GPUs, the coffee beside me already cold. And still, I froze. Because someone had just touched something they didn't understand. I tunneled into the logs fast. There it was. An unauthorized diagnostic ping against Node 7C, the one nested behind 3 layers of license-bound code. No credential string, no internal signature, just a brute request from Alec's test environment labeled optimization staging. I felt my jaw clench. That shell wasn't staging. That was production grade. That was live. Quick pause. If you're listening right now and you're one of the 97% who haven't subscribed, tap that button and like the video. Seriously, it fuels this work and it tells the story-hungry part of YouTube to bring more of us in. Now, back to the night I realized someone was cutting wires blind. I closed the lid and sat there in the blue glow of the vault, just breathing, not panicking, not yet. See? For 11 months, I had kept my name out of the dashboards. My fingerprints were on everything, but only if you knew where to look. Metadata tags, indirect patch notes, version forks hidden in the orchestration layer. I didn't want credit. I wanted stability. And it worked. Until Alec Drayton landed like a smug meteor from a consulting gig. All teeth and phrases like clean architecture and youth-led transition. His first town hall, he said, "Legacy logic is our biggest risk." I blinked from the back row. That legacy logic was what kept our compliance dashboards from folding under Q4 loadouts. It was my logic. Just wrapped in silence and contracts no one bothered to read. Alec didn't know I held the license keys to the control layer. That my contract, signed back when Altamerix was still Altamerix Analytics pre-Series A, assigned ownership of all deep core modules to me, until formal revocation with co-signature. A clause buried so deep in the contract, even legal only remembered it when systems broke. I'd built it that way on purpose, not for revenge, for survival. Back then, they needed me. I'd joined on a 2-week freelance patch project and stayed 2 years. When the funding came, I was offered equity. I asked for something else, authorship rights. They laughed, but I got it, because no one thought code could own you back. Over time, they forgot. They always do. Tech is a goldfish, but I remembered. Every system I upgraded, every obsolete workflow I gutted and replaced with lightweight async triggers, I anchored to my license structure. It wasn't ego, it was insurance, because I'd seen what happened to the quiet ones before. Alec's second week, he dismantled the ops team. Half were reassigned to strategic redundancy analysis. A third were laid off. And me? He never even learned my name. I was just the dev who handles patching. I watched him delete 3 legacy alerts in his first deployment. Alerts I'd tuned to fire when unauthorized users breached handshake protocols. He didn't know they were tied to a trigger. So when I saw his ping that night, 2:13 a.m., I didn't panic. I opened the backup node and activated passive logging. Then I waited. Let them think they were optimizing. Let them feel smart. Because every unauthorized access reclassified their deployment state. They were pulling levers in a cockpit they didn't build. The next morning, Alec breezed into the engineering floor like he'd personally invented YAML. Team, he grinned. The new patch will double throughput and reduce dependency on legacy containers. A few people clapped. I didn't. He didn't notice. I walked to my desk, popped in my headphones, and began quietly updating the clause reference index in the license vault. Just in case. Just so no one could say, later, that I hadn't made the terms visible. I added 1 line to the header. Reconfirmed ownership of all control layer modules per clause 6.1c, effective retroactively from date of signature and enforceable upon unilateral termination. I saved it. Time-stamped. Notarized via our internal hash system. Immutable. Legally recognized by the software IP board. And then I went back to work. Because people like Alec always assume infrastructure is free. That the system runs because someone somewhere paid AWS. They don't see the hours, the notes, the 1,000 tiny tweaks that keep memory leaks from toppling dashboards on end-of-quarter nights. They think cutting out the quiet one saves them money. They never ask who actually owns the engine. I did. And Alec had just triggered the countdown. 2 weeks before fiscal close, the log started coughing blood. I was running a routine check, memory audit on node cluster G for the kind of garbage collection bugs that always sneak in after a sprint. Nothing big. Until I spotted the trace, 5 failed access attempts against the control shell. No internal override signature. No escalated request. Just brute force call attempts wrapped in a lazy Jenkins header marked scheduler, refactor, final 2. I sat there blinking. Once. Twice. That shell wasn't just mine. It was mine. Structurally, legally, architecturally, it was license-bound and IP-gated, with clause-triggered failovers tied to handshake validation. Accessing it without the right sequence didn't just trip alerts. It reclassified deployment status under Software IP Clause 6.1c. In other words, unauthorized access converted their live environment into a rights violation, and every single ping was timestamped, hashed, and escrow logged through my LLC's backend for legal arbitration. I flagged the activity, quietly. Sent a note to Ops and Legal with the subject, unauthorized API behavior, potential breach. I attached the log segment and added one polite line. Please confirm this activity is authorized. Module license terms remain active per prior agreement. No response. 6 hours later, Alex swaggered over like he was about to sell me a subscription I already owned. Project lead in tow, some kid with startup stickers all over his MacBook, and the overconfident air of someone who thought CI/CD meant clicking deploy and hoping for the best. Hey, Alex smiled like we were old friends. Just FYI, we pushed a streamlined scheduler patch into staging. Should speed things up across core. I stared. You mean the container tied to control shell rsked core v4? Yeah, that one, he nodded. We restructured it, cut some legacy stuff. No big. I blinked slowly, like a cat about to swat a glass off the table. That shell's not patchable without a signed override, I said. He laughed. It's just infra. Nobody owns pipelines. I didn't respond. Not then. Because it wasn't just infra. It was a vehicle running on biometric ignition, and they were jamming a coat hanger into the dashboard. The module he touched rerouted runtime control for every allocation job, over 500 members. And it lived under a license they never revoked, because no one even remembered it had to be revoked. I could have gone nuclear right there. Clause 6.1c gave me the right, but that wasn't the play. Instead, I nodded once. Good to know. They walked off, smug as hell. I sat back down and ran a delta diff on the patch. They'd changed 12 lines, 4 broke compliance, 2 triggered redundancy kill switches I'd left as dormant functions. 1 tried to override a lock file that rerouted through my LLC endpoint. I didn't stop them. Because if you want the trap to work, you don't slam the lid early. You let the mouse have the cheese. That night, I updated the trigger conditions on my audit node. Change the threshold from unauthorized call to unauthorized call within 30 days of license owner termination. Then I backed it up, notarized it, and quietly replicated it to 3 mirror nodes outside the Altimerex cloud stack. 1 in Oregon, 1 in Zurich, 1 on a personal server I kept behind a dummy DNS named after my grandmother's cat. All still legal, all still passive. Because I knew what Alec was building toward. He wanted to gut the ops stack before the quarter closed, wanted to claim performance gains, cut legacy drag, book the efficiency for bonuses, and I'd seen it before. These guys always want numbers, not knowledge. They think systems are just levers and dashboards and fresh UI. They never ask who wired the fuse box under the floorboards, or what clause kicks in when you step on the wrong tile. A week later, I found another set of pings, this time against the config mirror, another shell Alex shouldn't even know existed. They were testing reach, seeing what they could get away with, so I let them. They pushed another patch at 3:24 a.m., some garbage cron adjustment that bypassed the runtime limiter and rewired latency metrics to their own Slack alert. I didn't delete it, I just forked the behavior. From that point on, every performance gain they thought they were seeing, simulated, scripted by me. The system was faking improvement. On paper, it looked perfect. But in the background, every request was duplicating itself into escrowed logs. Every dashboard was flagging its own source as unlicensed. They thought they were outpacing the old stack. They were just speeding toward the clause trigger. By fiscal close, the system would be ready to flip. Every illegal override would self-classify. Every handshake they bypassed would route to the license timestamp. And if they terminated me, well, the moment they pulled that lever, the clause wouldn't just wake up. It would bite. December 31st, 11:57 p.m. The email hit like a car crash in a library. No warning, no noise, just sudden suffocating silence. Subject line, termination, effective immediately. No salutation, no context. Just a block of text from HR, time-stamped for legal clarity. This message serves as formal notice, blah blah. Your access will be revoked shortly. Signed by a woman I'd trained 2 quarters ago on the difference between soft deletes and hard wipes. No meeting, no voice, no eye contact, just vapor. I stared at the screen for maybe 3 seconds. Then I opened a terminal window, because I wasn't asleep. I hadn't slept on New Year's Eve in years. It's when systems buckle, when reports finalize, when dashboards tip over under the weight of greedy code and rushed projections. I'd been prepping for this one since Thanksgiving. At 12:01 a.m., Altamerix's new quarterly allocation engine went live. Auto-executed the bonus reports, reconciled department-level optimizations, triggered Alec's golden metrics. The system didn't just light up, it screamed across internal Slack. Fiscal Q4 allocation complete. 17% efficiency gain. Bonuses distributed. The emojis were the cherry on the middle finger, except the control suite Alec had been tampering with wasn't open source, wasn't even licensed under Altamerix's current stack. It was mine. Nested. Time-stamped. Bound to a clause embedded 6 years ago when the company begged me to stabilize their deployment layer after a failed merge corrupted 2 months of customer data. They forgot that part. I didn't. Clause 6.1c. Unauthorized deployment of control layer modules post-termination auto-converts license state to exclusive, effective immediately. Meaning the moment they fired me, while my code was still running live, the system legally declared every line of core logic as private IP, not public, not shareable, not usable, not theirs. The clause didn't need my input to activate. It was self-executing. It just needed one trigger condition, a severance action initiated without a co-signed release of platform ownership, which conveniently they never got, because they never even asked. I watched the logs roll in, every bonus package deployed, every efficiency metric recorded, every line of data flowing through unauthorized pipes, all of it legally classified now as an access violation, retroactively. Alec had just fired the one person who built the rails while the train was in motion. I pulled up my terminal's monitor window. Backend Node 3 lit up first, flagged a handshake failure. Not enough to stop traffic, but enough to tell me the clause handshake had kicked in. Node 4 followed. Then Node 6. The system wasn't crashing, it was reclassifying. Function by function, container by container, my infrastructure was asserting its status like a polite but deadly lawyer at a wine tasting. Ah yes, this Pinot runs illegally over a module you don't own. Shall we notify the regulators, or would you prefer a quiet settlement? I'd built it to do exactly that. Not to punish, but to remind. Control isn't about buttons and passwords. It's about authorship, ownership. Clause verified custody of what actually moves the system forward. Alec? He thought power came with titles and Slack authority. Thought deleting a name from the payroll meant deleting the person behind the architecture. He didn't understand that the moment he clicked terminate, he transferred all control back to me. Automatically. By 12:09 a.m., 2 service bridges had failed checksum verification. Alert logs pinged the internal compliance team. They'd ignore it for now, New Year's Eve and all, but the entries were permanent, immutable, auditable. By 12:11 a.m., my LLC had already received the nightly mirrored digest from the escrow server. By 12:13 a.m., I had a fresh PDF summary in my inbox titled Altamerix System Violation Report, License State Exclusive, Triggered 0001. The footer was my favorite part. Generated per contractual license clause 6.1c, Crypture Labs, LLC, all rights reserved. I didn't need to call anyone, didn't need to shout. I just leaned back, took a long breath, and closed the terminal. They thought I was gone. They didn't realize I'd already written the system's response. Years ago. In silence. By dawn, the silence had turned to screaming. It started with the login bridge. Simple, familiar, taken for granted. Around 6:14 a.m., users from 3 departments couldn't authenticate into their dashboards. Then payroll. Then procurement. The sync queue went red. Ops escalated to DevOps. DevOps ran a rollback. Nothing changed. They tried restarting the container sync. Checksum failed. Twice. On the East Coast, Alex's refactored runtime modules triggered a memory leak loop and dumped half the Q4 allocation logs into cold storage. But no one could access them. The system refused to recognize its own environment. Task queues flooded with system messages, all repeating the same phrase. Unverified license owner. Control shell blocked. The clause was awake. See, Clause 6.1c didn't crash systems. It wasn't built to break. It was built to relabel, to retag every unauthorized call, every API handshake, every container spin-up from that point forward as a violation of active IP law. It didn't shout. It didn't corrupt. It just calmly marked their entire platform as stolen property and logged it, which in legal terms is so much worse. At 7:03 a.m., internal compliance pinged legal. Are we undergoing a staged environment freeze? Legal responded with the corporate equivalent of a shrug. Unknown, possibly related to year-end sync behavior. Investigating. By 7:17 a.m., someone finally checked the logs, and the logs told the truth. Every request hitting the control shell was flagged with a mismatch. The system had begun quarantining its own submodules, like a body rejecting a stolen organ. I watched it happen from my own terminal, remote, encrypted, logged in through my LLC's observer interface. Read only, but perfectly legal. They hadn't revoked my license access. They couldn't. It was bound to the contract until both parties signed a mutual release, and they'd fired me without asking for one. So now the clause was working as designed. Not attacking, classifying. Every attempt to run the system without proper ownership was redefined as unlicensed deployment, which, in a regulated platform like Altamirix's, one that touched financial dashboards and investor systems, was the equivalent of dropping a live eel into a courtroom. By 8:12 a.m., Alec posted in Slack, "Anyone else getting auth errors on job threads? Can someone kill and reboot?" Someone replied, "Already tried. Container handshake is failing on verification." And then, mercifully, another reply from a back-end dev who had been there long enough to remember, "Does this have anything to do with the control layer being bound to a private license?" Silence. A full minute passed. Then a private message hit my inbox from one of the engineers they hadn't laid off. 3 words. "Is this you?" I didn't answer. I wasn't obligated to. Clause 6.1c was answering for me. By 8:30 a.m., Altamirix's CI/CD pipeline was throwing missing license attribution flags upstream into their test environments. Someone tried rolling back to a 3-month-old image, only to find that the old images had already been tagged with the same violation, because they all contained the same shell, my logic, my framework, the blood of the platform. I knew the phases. Phase 1 was panic. Phase 2 was denial. Phase 3 was a meeting. At 8:44 a.m., legal requested a 10:30 sync to review historical license attachments. That would be the meeting where someone finally pulled the original contract, the one dated before Altamirix rebranded, the one with my signature and a notarized addendum referencing control layer licensing, clause 6.1c, in bold type. That's when they'd read the fine print. That's when they'd realize this wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't even a technical failure. It was compliance. The systems weren't rejecting them out of spite. They were simply obeying a deeper instruction set, one written in ink, one that lived in the bones of the platform, one that activated the moment they forgot the quiet woman behind the curtain wrote the curtain itself. Meanwhile, I sipped my coffee. Same kitchen, same chipped mug. Outside, fireworks littered the sidewalk in wet little clumps. The world thought it was New Year's Day. Altamirix thought it was a glitch, but I knew what it really was. It was the system remembering who owned it, and that kind of memory doesn't fade, doesn't bend, doesn't apologize. It just executes. By 10:31 a.m., they had a printed copy of the contract on the boardroom table. Legal had circled it with a red Sharpie like they were grading a failing midterm. Section 6.1c, second paragraph, second sentence, highlighted, underlined, starred. License ownership of all control layer modules remains with developer until full revocation event, co-signed post-exit. They stared at the sentence like it had materialized out of nowhere, like it hadn't been there for 6 years, like it hadn't passed through 2 rounds of council review, platform compliance certification, and board-level signature during the IP consolidation phase. But it had. They'd just stopped paying attention the moment I stopped needing their permission. Alex sat in the corner, tapping his phone, avoiding eye contact. The CTO, Barker, was flipping pages like the solution would appear on the next sheet. It didn't, because the solution wasn't in the papers anymore. It was in the logs. Immutable logs, signed, mirrored, time-stamped, auditable. Escrowed across 3 legal jurisdictions under Crypture Labs' digital custodianship. The moment they deployed the bonus engine over my infrastructure, those actions became traceable legal events, not hypotheticals, not staging artifacts. Evidence. Someone from finance had already reached out to legal an hour earlier asking why their bonus calculation system had flagged a license error invalid owner ID during their payout script. Someone else from investor relations had flagged that 2 of the client dashboards weren't refreshing, and 1 had returned a prompt. This infrastructure is under private IP license. Please contact the software owner to resolve attribution. Simple, clean, legally bulletproof. I hadn't written that prompt for drama. I wrote it because I got tired of watching good systems die under bad management. They were using my code like it was free real estate, and now the clause had printed the deed and tacked it to the server room door. They still didn't know how deep it ran. I did. The control shell wasn't just a gateway. It orchestrated the real-time logic underpinning the very structure Alec was bragging about. Those performance boosts, the automated cleanup, the smart redirector layer they demoed last quarter. Every node improvement passed through my logic trees. Every efficiency stat stemmed from my forked, license-wrapped kernel modules. And those modules? Bound by authorship, not employer contract. Not verbal assumption, not Alec's ego, authorship. Back in the room, someone asked if it could be walked back. Can we just revoke the clause? A junior counsel answered, nervously, No, it's not revocable by us, it requires co-signature. From who? They all turned to Alec, but he already knew the answer. He didn't say my name. Couldn't. Instead, he muttered, She never signed the exit paperwork. I hadn't. They terminated me with a system email. No notice, no conversation, no handshake. Just a midnight timestamp and the smell of a bonus report cooked on my infrastructure. They thought removing my name meant removing my rights. But that line, Section 6.1c, didn't care about job titles or payroll status. It cared about who built what. And the ownership didn't vanish just because Alec wanted cleaner slides for the board. It stayed. Silent, patient, waiting. Now, legal was realizing the reports from this morning, those tidy little charts Alec had auto-deployed, were technically invalid. They'd been run over unauthorized logic, which meant they weren't just inadmissible for audits. They were fraudulent. And that's when the panic really began. I didn't gloat, didn't text anyone, didn't even refresh my observer terminal. I just watched the error pings flow across the mirrored dashboard, each one calmly stating, License breach. Owner not verified. It didn't yell. It didn't crash anything. It just refused to lie. Because control isn't about who has the badge. It's about who wrote the rules. And in that room full of suits and legal pads and cold coffee, they finally understood. They'd been living inside a system they didn't own. And the woman they ghosted at midnight? She'd already filed her claim. By January 3rd, the whispers turned into subpoenas. 2 regulators, one from the Financial Data Compliance Bureau, the other from the Interstate Software Licensing Authority, flagged Altamerix for failed compliance assertions. Someone on the investor call must have escalated. Maybe it was the frozen dashboards. Maybe it was the license prompts. Maybe it was the fact that Alec's fully optimized system was suddenly bricked by a clause written before he'd graduated from whatever prestige-light MBA mill taught him to skip the fine print. Their back end was bleeding credibility. The audit logs, still intact, still mirrored, still marked with my LLC's signature, told the story. The dashboards pushing live investor metrics were running atop modules not legally owned by Altamirix, not licensed, not attributed, not cleared. Every time Alec's system pinged the financial layer, it was technically violating federal compliance policy on data governance. And unlike code, that kind of violation doesn't just crash your systems, it freezes your funding. Investor dashboards failed to update, queries timed out, response delays climbed from 5 seconds to 12 to 35. A full refresh returned a red banner across the top. This data environment is currently under license dispute. Please refer to Compliance ID ABRASQ Labs XCL 125. That wasn't a system bug. That was us. At 9:42 a.m., Crypture Labs filed a formal notice of enforcement with the Software IP Board, citing unauthorized and continued use of licensed platform infrastructure by Altamirix Systems, in direct violation of Clause 6.1c, bound to registered ownership under Crypture Labs, LLC. We attached 87 pages of time-stamped logs, 3 notarized copies of the original license agreement, and a screenshot of Alec's Slack post from New Year's Day. I think we can override the old control layer. We just need to push through the metrics before Monday. That was our favorite part. Exhibit 17. See, the clause didn't need a court. It needed sunlight. Once it was filed, the Software IP Board flagged Altamirix in their registry, which meant any vendor, auditor, or regulatory agency plugged into the compliance network got a ping. That included Altamirix's payment processor, and their equity tracking partner, and the investor portal that served their quarterly performance to all Series A and B stakeholders. The freeze wasn't instant, it was surgical. The payment processor placed a hold, then issued a review request, then notified Altamirix they were suspending the automatic bonus wire until licensing status was cleared. Altamirix tried to push a manual override. The override failed. Every pipeline they used to move data, every bridge they built on top of what they thought was just code, routed back through verification layers I'd written, layers they hadn't owned in years, layers they fired without revoking, layers now legally inaccessible under a federally recognized software dispute. The board tried calling legal. Legal said they were already on the phone with a regulator. Alec tried calling infrastructure. Infrastructure said they were working from home, under advisement not to touch anything until clarity was achieved. Clarity came at 11:08 a.m. A new message hit every terminal inside Altamirix's ops network, not from me, from the regulator. Your current environment has been classified as exclusive use pending resolution under Federal Software Ownership Rule 14a. Further deployment or data operations may result in financial penalties. They stared at it. Then someone, probably Alec, tried one last deploy script. The shell returned a single line. License, invalid, module locked per owner rights. That's when the panic shifted, not toward me, but toward each other. Whispers in the hall, voices raised in the executive wing, questions no one wanted to answer aloud. Who authorized the final push? Who signed off on termination without a release? Who deleted the name on the contract without checking what the contract actually said? I didn't answer those questions. I didn't have to, because my name was already on the enforcement notice, and the title was clear. Crypture Labs, primary owner, control layer infrastructure. They didn't just kick out the architect. They were still living in her house. And now the locks had changed. I didn't answer the phone, not once. Not when the CTO left a message at 6:47 a.m. that sounded like he was trying not to hyperventilate through a smile. Not when Alec's assistant emailed, subject line, just hoping to connect. Not even when someone from HR texted me, on New Year's Day no less, saying we're sorry for any confusion. There was no confusion, not on my end. So I handed it to my lawyer. Madeline is the kind of counsel who drinks lukewarm espresso out of a steel mug and files suit before breakfast. We've worked together since Crypture was still just me, a rented server, and a folder of redundant clauses. She read through everything calmly, asked me 3 questions, then opened her email and started typing. At 8:23 a.m., her message landed in Altamirix's general counsel inbox with the subject line, Notice of License Enforcement, Breach ongoing. The body was concise. Surgical. As of January 3rd, 11 active production nodes are deploying infrastructure bound to license Clause 6.1c. No co-signed release has been executed by the license owner. Access constitutes active breach of exclusive use rights under Schedule B. Your team is advised to immediately cease operations or initiate settlement per valuation protocol. She CC'd the software IP board. She attached the full license chain. She included the escrow digest with timestamp deployment logs, 2 system screenshots, and Alec's name in bold next to the trigger command, chato, deploy, final v2.sh, no commentary, just facts. By 9:04 a.m., one of Altimerix's Series B investors forwarded the email, unedited, back to the executive team with a single question in the header. How did a terminated employee retain platform ownership? That's when it spread. Through back channels, through compliance, through investor relations, a wave of corporate dread, crashing into all the wrong sandcastles. See, in their heads, they were done with me. Erased. Off the books. Just a quiet termination filed under cost reduction. They'd already filled my role with 3 people and a bullet point roadmap pulled from an old Jira board. What they didn't realize, what Alec never understood, is that I didn't own the platform the way they thought ownership worked. I didn't sit on top of it. I was it. My code wasn't rented. It was authored. It wasn't checked out from a library. It was born from necessity, layer by layer, during 3 a.m. fixes, fire drills, and silent weekends when everyone else was pretending strategy meant yelling louder. So when they cut me loose, they didn't sever a function. They severed the license tether holding their system together. Madeline's email was like flipping on a courtroom light with receipts stapled to the walls. By 10:15 a.m., Barker, the CTO, tried calling again. His assistant even left a voicemail this time. We'd really like to discuss a constructive resolution. Sure, Schedule B had already priced the license reacquisition value based on live deployment dependency, Q1, Q4 usage rates, and risk exposure. That number wasn't hypothetical. It had been calculated when I formed Crypture Labs in case this ever happened. And now it had. They could settle or stop, but they weren't running another bonus engine through my core without paying for the privilege. I didn't gloat, didn't send a snarky reply, just watched the system track every new request pinging a locked module. 11 nodes, 3 CI/CD forks, 1 critical live allocator that couldn't complete a batch job without my shell. The clause had no ego. It didn't shout, it didn't spike their servers. It simply waited. And now, so did I, because the question wasn't whether they wanted to settle. The question was how long they could survive without the engine I left running, and the answer was already logged. The boardroom clock read 9:05 a.m. and every chair was filled, except the one Alec was supposed to be in. He hovered near the coffee station like he could somehow blend into the cabinetry. Barker, the CTO, looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was missing, top button undone. The general counsel held a thick binder, hands perfectly still, like a priest about to deliver last rites. "Let's begin," the chairman said flatly. No greetings, no pleasantries, just dread and the low hum of legal consequence. The general counsel stood and cleared her throat. She didn't waste time. "Due to unauthorized use of licensed infrastructure post-unilateral termination," she began, "Altimerix is in violation of Clause 6.1c and its associated IP protections. Crypture Labs has filed a formal notice of enforcement, backed by escrowed system logs, time-stamped violations, and unmatched deployment fingerprints. If unresolved by January 10th, we face a platform-wide injunction under federal software IP law." She didn't read that last part. She just let it sit. The chairman turned his head slowly toward Alec. Not an outburst, not a stare, just a question forming like a storm behind calm eyes. "Did you authorize this deployment?" Alec's face had the color of printer paper left out in the rain. "I assumed the shell was part of the base stack," he mumbled. The chairman didn't blink. "You assumed." Alec nodded, swallowing hard. "The contract. I hadn't seen it. I thought—" "You thought wrong," the chairman snapped. Not loudly, just final, like a door locking from the inside. Then, to no one in particular, "Step out." Alec didn't argue. He didn't even nod. He just walked out with his hands half clenched like he'd forgotten what to do with them. The door closed behind him with the softest thud imaginable, but the silence that followed was deafening. Barker leaned forward, voice low and tight. "We're working on a temporary patch. If we can reroute deployment over a clean fork." "You're not listening," Legal cut in. "There's no clean fork. The architecture is the IP. It is the core." The chairman looked down at the table, then tapped the edge of a document. "Schedule B from the license agreement." "And this number here?" he asked. "That's real?" "It's the legally defined settlement value," General Counsel replied. "Indexed to usage, and it's enforceable." Nobody moved, because that was the moment the last illusion collapsed. The illusion that Alec had brought innovation. The illusion that you could replace a person by cutting their name from a budget. The illusion that code was just code and not a living framework someone had spent years breathing life into. The chairman spoke again, but this time with quiet weight. "We cut the architect and kept the house. And now we're surprised the lights don't work." No one disagreed. Someone finally asked the only question that mattered. What happens if she doesn't agree to settle? Legal's reply was brutal in its simplicity. "We rebuild from scratch, without the code, without the architecture, without any of the current stack." They all stared at the table like it might offer a solution, because now they knew it wasn't a bug, or a miscommunication, or a hostile clause. It was the truth they'd ignored for convenience. They had built their empire on borrowed ground, and the deed had never been in their name. I didn't need to be in that room. They were reading my name off the title page now. On January 14th, the wire cleared. $4.9 million, labeled not as severance, not damages, not even a settlement. Just what it was. License acquisition fee, control layer, Schedule B. It was filed through the software IP board, time-stamped, publicly indexed, and marked as resolved. No non-disclosure clause, no apology note, just a number and a receipt. Altamerix never released a press statement, but their internal memo leaked anyway. Someone always leaks when power changes hands. In alignment with long-term growth goals, Altamerix Systems will embark on a strategic rebuild initiative. A new back-end architecture will be explored to replace legacy infrastructure. The email used the word legacy 4 times. Not once did it mention the clause, or the woman who wrote it. Meanwhile, we went live. Phoenix Shell, the hardened fork of the control layer I built in silence while they tried to erase me. Same bones, but faster. Encrypted. Modular. Designed for companies who understand that infrastructure isn't something you borrow and forget to return. Our landing page was simple. Black, white, clean code lines. In the corner, a quiet tagline. Engineered by the woman they tried to replace. I didn't post it on social, didn't brag, didn't pitch VCs. I just clicked launch, then walked into the server room I actually owned, poured a cup of coffee, and sat down to check our first client deployment metrics. 5 new enterprise leads, 3 compliance inquiries, 1 investor from a former Altamerix partner asking if we offered platform migration support. We did, because some systems don't collapse. They evolve, they migrate, they transfer ownership, integrity intact, to the hands that built them in the first place. And when the dust settles and the dashboards reload under new code, there's no need to explain. The logs speak louder than the lawsuits. I never sent Alec a message, never returned Barker's call, never forwarded the final check to the CTO with a passive-aggressive emoji. I didn't need to. They knew. I saw it in the analytics. Altamerix's IP address hit the Phoenix Shell demo page 3 times that week. No clicks, no downloads, just long stares. They were still trying to understand how the thing they threw out kept running long after they locked the door. It's simple. You can kill the payroll. You can cancel the badge. You can even wipe the chair clean. But when the system was written by someone who built it to remember, the memory doesn't go with the resignation. It goes with the author, and I never gave that part back.